Hello everyone, and welcome to the Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons Launch Day celebration. It's here, it's happening right now, it's really here. I hope you all have your coffee or time zone appropriate food and are looking forward to the adventures awaiting you in Cantha. I'm Rookery, but you can call me Rook, and I'm a Guild Wars 2 content creator and ArenaNet partner. You might have known me as well by my old name Bird of Chess. Last year, for the End of Dragons First Look livestream, I was asked to do something so monumentally foolhardy that it could have only been one of the commander's schemes. To reveal End of Dragons, and catch everybody up on 10 years of narrative, I performed a live summary of the entire Guild Wars 2 story thus far. Today, for the launch of End of Dragons, we'll be replaying that video with a new pre-recorded section going into the details of Cantha's history and what the future has in store for the Empire of the Dragon. Thanks to Wooden Potatoes Crew, the Guild Wars 2 wiki contributors, and to my partner who helped behind the scenes. A huge thanks as well to the Guild Wars 2 narrative team, who provided me some context, without any spoilers, for our rundown of Canthan History. For time's sake, this summary will assume some knowledge of the lore of Guild Wars 2. Get ready for some high-quality voice acting to kick us off.
Dragons have long been thought to be as much a part of Tyria as the sun, moon, land, and seas. No one, not even the dwarves, know how long they've been here. The Jotun and the Norn both have lingering stories passed down through the generations about the last rise of the dragons. Most scholars give these tales little credit, unfortunately, as so much time has passed. It was over 10,000 years ago that the dragons last returned to their slumber. Excerpt from The Nature of Dragons by Ogden Stonehealer. The Elder Dragons are primordial beings who have throughout history awoken and wrought devastation upon the world of Tyria before falling back into slumber. There are 6 known Elder Dragons: Primordus, the Dragon of Fire and Conflagration; Jormag, the Dragon of Ice and Persuasion; Zaitan, the Dragon of Death and Shadow; Kralkatorrik, the Dragon of Crystal and Fury; Mordramoth, the Dragon of Plant and Mind; and Steve. No, we don't actually know the last one's name. Only that it starts with an S, and their domain likely has something to do with water. The story of Guild Wars 2 begins with a very personal story. Your personal story. In 1219 AE, the Elder Dragon Zaitan awoke and brought humanity's sunken nation of Ore back to the surface. This sent a terrible wave across the lands. The Great Tsunami drowned thousands. Corsair fleets who took refuge in the Shattered Peninsula were wiped out, and in its place came an undead navy manned by the risen servants of Zaitan. The black-sailed ships blocked sea access to Cantha and Alona, beginning an age of isolation for Tyria. While players were introduced to their respective races, cultures, and concerns in the start of the personal story, Zaitan's lieutenants were seen leading their risen forces deeper into Tyria. Despite the warning signs of increased dragon activity, they were viewed as isolated incidents, and Zaitan a distant threat. Yeah, great job, guys. But where others continued to ignore the signs, 3 multiracial organizations made it their mission to combat the draconic threat. The orders were as follows. The Order of Whispers. Yeah, I don't have any notes on this one. Just sadness and apples? I'm kidding. I'm not really kidding. Their current leader is Riel Darkwater. The Order of Whispers believe the dragons cannot be defeated, but must be returned to sleep by any means. Dermot Pryor is pretty much just like nerds as far as the eye can see. It's also mine. It's my priory. Led by Asura Gix, they study the past to survive the future, in hopes that intellect or some lost piece of knowledge can save the world from the rise of the dragons. Then we have the Vigil. Oh, I do have something for this, so audio warning. Yeah, I feel like that pretty much summarizes it. Does that cover it? This one was founded and led by General Almora Soulkeeper, for whom the song was written. The Vigil believe only a united army of all the races can defeat an Elder Dragon. While the 3 orders aimed to combat the draconic threat, there had been others before them who stood in defiance of the Elder Dragons. After choosing their order, the player character was witness to a meeting between one such group, the former members of Destiny's Edge. Destiny's Edge was a fellowship once composed of 6 heroic individuals: Air, the Norn huntress with the soul of an artist; Snaf, the Asuran genius, and his ambitious assistant Zoja; Ritlock, the ferocious Char warrior in exile; Kaith, a deadly Sylvari with deep secrets; and Logan, who was also there. Oh no, he's the valiant human guardian dealing with divided loyalties. See, he's got depth.
They had once been allies of the only dragon that had fought alongside mankind, a prophetess named Glint. Both she and Snaff were killed while confronting Kralkatorrik, which tore the group apart. The player realized they would need to reconnect their bonds if they were going to take up the fight once more. The Elder Dragon's champion defeated the Lion Guard stationed on Claw Island and readied an invasion on Lion's Arch itself. The character and their mentor in the Order rushed to Claw Island to defend it, but the fortress was lost along with their ally. The Orders realized that although they'd survived, they stood no chance alone. They set aside their differences and formed the Pact to retake Claw Island. The Pact was the greatest alliance Tyria had ever seen, with the Vigil forming the bulk of its army, the scholars and engineers of the Derman Priory working on arcane and technological advancements, and the Order of Whispers handling infiltration and sabotage. The Pact made for a strong fighting force capable of virtually any task. Due to his knowledge of Zaitan and his good relations with the many races, the Sylvari firstborn Traherne was appointed the Marshal of the Pact and promoted the player character to the position of Pact Commander. Under their joint leadership, the combined forces of the Pact managed to retake Claw Island and looked ahead to the lost Kingdom of Or, where Zaitan and his Risen awaited. Or was once a kingdom blessed by the human gods themselves, who upon arriving in Tyria built the shining city of Ara over a great source of magic known as the Artesian Waters. Drowned beneath the waves to stop the progress of the Char army in generations past, Zaitan later dredged it up from the juice box, corrupted the Artesian Waters to be its own magical juice box, and then filled it with undead minions. Fun. To cut Zaitan off from his juice box, the Pact rushed into the ruins of Or, where it systematically undermined Zaitan's forces. This allowed Traherne to enact the ritual of purification to cleanse the Artesian Waters. The Pact airship, the Glory of Tyria, crewed by reunited Destiny's Edge and the commander, fought Zaitan in the skies above Ara. Bombarded by an anti-dragon cannon, the Elder Dragon at last fell to its demise, crashing on the eastern edge of the City of the Gods. With Zaitan's defeat, Traherne claimed that the impossible had at last become possible. The Pact believed they would need to achieve 4 more impossible feats before the world was truly free. This takes us to Living Season 1. I hope you're all still hanging in there. Here we go. We're going to blast through Living Season 1. There was a ton covered in this season. A lot of it had to just be cut, though. There are great summaries out there. But to start, I'm going to touch on a place called South Sun Cove. This is more of a prelude story, which featured a corrupt island resort, murderous crab monsters known as the Karka, and introduced 2 major characters. Sorry, Inspector Kiel. Kanak, a repentant hireling turned freedom fighter that rebelled against his employer to do what was right, and Casimir Mead, one part of the investigatory duo that make up Delacqua Investigations, with the other half being her business and romantic partner, Marjorie Delacqua. I would love to share the South Sun details with everyone, and in fact, one of our Pool of Memories missions dives into Kanak's story during it, but to be honest, we do not have the time. So the real focus of this season was a little thing known as Scarlet's War. Unnatural storms accompanied a series of mysterious assaults in the Shiver Peaks, causing Norn and Char refugees to flock to their capital cities. While a war council was held in the Black Citadel, a young Norn made his way there to beg for aid in retaking his homestead from the forces responsible for the recent attacks. The youth claimed he was the son of legendary Heir Stegalkin. Ritlock Brimstone, a former companion of Heirs from Destiny's Edge, called him a dirty liar and sent him to Holbrick, who denied him in the interests of self-preservation, leaving him with no choice but to retake his home himself. We can't confirm nor deny that this may have been the root of this character's deep-seated insecurities and lack of self-confidence, but either way, this is the entrance of the truly beloved character known as Bram Aerson. Meanwhile, a beautiful pure char named Rox was sent to reclaim a Devourer hatchery as a test to join Ritlock Brimstone's warband, which she accomplished. Rox had lost her own warband prior to the mission, but an albino baby Devourer named Frostbite took a liking to her at the hatchery and refused to leave her side, giving her a companion she would never lose. Later that year, amidst the merriment of the Queen's Jubilee, a red Sylvari appeared. Revealing that she had been the mastermind of Tyria's recent troubles, this Scarlet Briar hijacked a force of clockwork guardians known as the Watch Knights. As time passed, more information about Scarlet and her history began to surface. Scarlet had once been a curious Sylvari named Ciara. Her ravenous desire for knowledge would eventually lead her to set up a device to peer into the inner mechanisms of the world. Inside the machine, she saw the universe stretched out before her. She pushed further and was confronted by a presence that overwhelmed her. Upon waking, she took the name Scarlet Briar and was plagued by the voice of that presence until any remnant of her sanity was gone. Scarlet's story was tragic, but that didn't lessen the monstrosity of her attacks on Tyria, of which there were many. In one memorable invasion, she summoned an enormous weapon in the Shiver Peaks in the form of a marionette that was ultimately defeated by the commander and their companions. They were joined in this fight by a young Asuran prodigy that admired Scarlet's genius named Taimi. Scarlet's greatest battle was waged in Lion's Arch, and was one that would change the landscape of the city forever. Scarlet won the city by flooding it with toxins, and in the fight to reclaim it, Bram was injured, and Marjorie struck down by their foe, leaving her love, Casimir, to believe she had perished. Though Rox had been tasked to personally take down Scarlet as the final test for admission into Ritlock's warband, she chose to tend to the wounded Bram and Marjorie, allowing Casimir to face her instead. Filled with fury, Casimir was successful in distracting Scarlet Briar long enough for the commander to deliver the killing blow, thus ending Scarlet's war. In the aftermath, a jarring sound echoed throughout Tyria. Taimi and the group surmised that the magical currents known as ley lines were akin to an ocean of magic that Scarlet had thrown a giant rock into, sending ripples out to wake the slumbering dragon. The voice that had plagued Scarlet was that of Mordramoth, whose vicious vines would slowly rouse to ensnare many more Sylvari to come. This takes us to Living Season 2, where everything obviously is really good and only continues to get better, and everybody's happy for all time. Not so much. The memory of Scarlet's terror lingered in central Tyria, and the strange roar that had rung out after her downfall only gave rise to new fears. Outside the perilous Maguma jungle, the Zephyrites' flying sanctum crash landed. For anyone who doesn't know, the Zephyrites are a group mainly composed of Canthan and Elonian humans that inherited the crystal dragon Glint's legacy. The Zephyrites travel the world on a breathtaking flying sanctum built with magic obtained from her corpse. But I guess not anymore since it crashed. The commander rescued the Zephyrites' leader, the Master of Peace, from the ship's saboteur, and clues led them to a settlement known as Prosperity. The local inhabitants of Prosperity remembered a Sylvari matching Scarlet's description that had rented a local room. Vines began surging up from beneath the ground to entangle several settlements in the region, and one such tremor caused a secret passage to be revealed in Scarlet's quarters. Cautiously, they explored the twisting tunnels and came upon a scientific lab built atop a confluence of energy known as a ley line hub. The group decided to split up and follow the path of Mordramoth's vines. Marjorie and Casimir went to meet up with Marjorie's sister Belinda, who was located at Fort Salma, while Rox and Bram ventured to Fort Concordia. Taimi stayed behind at the lab to investigate further. Upon arrival, they found that Mordram forces had infested both locations. Each party did what they could to secure the respective areas, but during the fight that took place in Fort Salma, Marjorie's sister Belinda was killed. Back at the lab, Taimi announced that she'd discovered the machine Scarlet had used to peer into the eternal alchemy, which everybody thought was a real bad idea to use themselves, but well, the commander was pulled into the device and received a vision. They were swimming through an ethereal plane where they encountered an embodiment of the pale tree. This was followed by 6 illuminated orbs revolving around a central, much larger sphere. One of the orbs grew near, then plunged into the center, aligning the rings orbiting it and flooding the surroundings in an eerie green light. The commander moved to organize a summit of all the races at the home and mother of the Sylvari, the Pale Tree, who could hopefully shed light on her role in the vision. Rox reported to Ritlock, who shared that he had a great new plan to take the sword to Hothin that had single-handedly ruined his most important relationship, I might add, and use it in a ritual to break the faux fire curse sustaining the ghost in Ascalon. When the ritual failed, Ritlock threw himself into a portal in the mists that swallowed the sword, proving that he would jump off a cliff if Sahothin told him to. Representatives gathered, and the summit was held. During the meeting, the Mordram attacked. Repelling the attack saved the grove, but the Pale Tree was greatly damaged. Before losing consciousness, the avatar of the tree showed the commander a vision of a golden chamber full of crystals. Marjorie and Casimir traveled to the Derman Priory archives to search the special collections for answers to the commander's vision. Unexpectedly, they found a surly dwarf named Ogden Stonehealer, the author of The Nature of Dragons, and one of the last surviving members of his kind on Tyria's surface. Ogden pointed out a special hourglass that was a relic containing a single grain of sand that doubled as a portal to Glint's lair. Once inside, the group was shown a vision of the Master of Peace retrieving Glint's last unbroken egg, which he saved and carried to the Zephyrites. Unfortunately, by the time they found the Master of Peace beneath the Silver Wastes, he had sustained a fatal wound inflicted by the Mordrem. With his final breaths, he attempted to turn over the egg, but Cantha appeared and stole it away, stating she had no time to explain. Needless to say, I was not pleased with her at this point for stealing away my Dragon Rider dreams. The Avatar of the Pale Tree did us a solid, and agreed to help the commander track Cantha down, and gave him a means to experience Cantha's memories. This revealed much. Cantha and the leader of the Nightmare Court, an opposing group of Sylvari that had left the Pale Tree, whose leader's name was Phelan, were once very close. When the second-born Sylvari arrived in the world, Phelan overheard one of their firstborn brethren named Wynn discussing something secretive with the Pale Tree. Determined to learn what they were keeping from the others, she and Cantha pursued Wynn. Upon cornering her, Phelan intended to torture their fellow Sylvari. But while Cantha shared a moment alone with her, Wynn confessed that what she had learned in her pre-life dream. The Sylvari were created to be minions of Mordramoth. She then begged Cantha to kill her and guard her secret. The commander confronted Cantha about the memories they'd experienced. She confirmed that everything they'd seen was true, but she refused to hand over the dragon egg, claiming it was too valuable. During all of this, the Pact had prepared itself following the summit, launching a fleet of airships to retaliate against Mordramoth's forces. Traherne, alongside Air, Logan, and Zoja, ordered fire from the lead ship. Their bombardment was ineffective, and the Vines attacked the fleet, pulling them down to the land below. Survivors climbing from the wreckage were attacked by Mordramoth-controlled Sylvari. In the final moments, Air fired tirelessly upon their foes, while Logan hung on the bow of the ship, holding Zoja in his other hand. But Traherne was nowhere to be seen. The commander and their allies... Heart of Thorns! It just rolls so perfectly into the next bit. The commander and their allies traveled beyond the Silver Wastes, where they witnessed the gravity of the Pact fleet's destruction. Bram spotted an encampment and rushed toward it, anxious to learn about his mother's fate. There they would find Grand Master Larenthir amidst the Pact soldiers, whose spirits were as broken as the ships they'd once manned. Larenthir explained that both Destiny's Edge and Marshal Traherne had survived the crash, but had been taken prisoner and moved further into the jungle. The Pact camp was attacked by waves of Mordrem as dawn approached. In the heat of the battle, Ritlock Brimstone appeared from the mists, blindfolded and wielding the edgelord powers of a revenant. With help from Ritlock's new spidey senses, they eventually found a Mordrem prison cell containing Air Stegelkin and the Grand Duchess Phelan of the Nightmare Court. Phelan declared that she would be free of all masters, and that neither the Pale Tree nor Mordramoth would control her. Phelan's thirst for personal freedom allowed no room for others. The Sylvari stumbled and fell as she fled from Mordramoth's minions, but Air doubled back to help her. Phelan rose, then stabbed her with a thorn and turned to run. Air was too good, too fierce, too strong for this world, and threw the thorn back at her, which felled Phelan before she could escape. Phelan was consumed by Mordramoth's vines, and she deserved it. Bram, who had spent much of his life simultaneously resenting living in his mother's shadow and wishing wholeheartedly to earn her approval, watched as his only chance at a future bond with her died before his eyes. Pushing onward into Maguma despite their terrible loss, the commander and their allies found themselves in a lush forest. Along the way, the party saw a strange glowing figure watching them from a distance. The glowing figure revealed himself to be a member of the Exalted, named Ruka. The Exalted are magical beings who were once Zephyrites. Through a magic ritual, he and his fellow guardians were turned into energy beings tasked with eternally protecting Glint's legacy. The commander and Ruka tracked Cantha through the jungle, finding her sprawled on the ground with Glint's egg. She was facing a macabre monster that possessed Phelan's face, now proclaiming her servitude to Mordramoth. Fleeing with the egg, the commander was infused and wielded part of its energy. Once safe, Ruka invited the commander to take the egg south to the city of Tarir, where they were welcomed by the city's ruler, the Exalted Luminate. Bringing the commander to Tarir's depths, they underwent a series of trials to ensure their capability. Succeeding in these trials, the egg sent a prophetic vision to the commander, which showed Mordramoth using Traherne, Logan, and Zoja as templates for a batch of new, improved Mordrem. With the egg safely under the watch of the Exalted, the commander left Tarir to find a way to destroy Mordramoth. Taimi had an idea as to where they could discover a way to accomplish just that. She led the group to an Asuran city named Rata Novus that had been destroyed by Mordremoth. There, they found a secret laboratory filled with research on the Elder Dragons. The research confirmed each Elder Dragon possessed one or some unique weaknesses. With the Pact forces and their allies launching their final assault on the mouth of Mordremoth, the Pact commander's squad pushed into Mordremoth's sanctum, the Heart of Thorns title drop. They were able to free Logan and Zoja, who had been hooked up to Mordrim pods. While they were at it, they killed the transformed Phelan, sparing us all a whole lot more nightmares. Bram relished that he had taken down his mother's murderer, while Kaith mourned the loss of her one-time friend and love. Making their way deeper into the tangle, they found Traherne fused to vines and barely conscious. Traherne suggested utilizing his link to the dragon to enter the Dream of Dreams, allowing the commander to strike directly at Mordremoth's weakness, his own psyche. Inside the dragon's mind, the allies were confronted with their worst fears. Both of the commander's companions nearly succumbed to the dragon's corrosive thoughts, but were able to break free with help from their allies. In the course of the fight, the Elder Dragon also tried to break the commander's will, but the commander turned Mordremoth's illusions back on their creator and defeated him. Outside the dragon's psyche, Traherne had one final request for the commander: to slay him and the last remnants of the Elder Dragon residing within him for good. As Traherne made his sacrifice, a massive amount of Mordremoth's magic exploded across Tyria, infusing Glint's egg with unknown influences before continuing northward. Mordremoth had finally been slain, but it had come with terrible costs, and there were still further consequences to come. Which takes us to Living Season 3. The victories in the war against Mordremoth were balanced by deep losses. Friends of Airstegelkin gathered around her former homestead to memorialize the great hero. Ritlock decided that with Air's death, it was time to form a new guild, Dragon's Watch. Bram didn't attend this because this was, shall we say, his trouble period. Taimi continued her research of dragons at Radanovus. General Almora Soulkeeper met with the commander and offered to elevate them to Traherne's rank, though the position of marshal would largely involve paperwork from then on. The commander turned her down, effectively resigning from the pact, although this would have been a very different game if they hadn't. At Canoc's urging, the group tracked down a wanted man with a super intense goatee to a coliseum above Bloodstone Fen. Minister Caudicus proclaimed himself to be the new leader of the White Mantle, a group of human outlaws wielding bloodstone magic that believed themselves to be the true rulers of Kryta. An ancient being known as the Mersat appeared, identifying himself as Lazarus. He ousted Caudicus as a heretic and incinerated many of his followers, then vanished. After all this nonsense with Goatee Man, Taimi contacted the group with grave news. Primordus had become active. While scouting signs of this awakening, the commander received another vision from Glint's egg. Returning to Tyria, they were told that the egg was about to hatch, but only they could witness it. Just as our beautiful baby girl emerged, Primordus's destroyer swarmed the chamber and tried to kill the hatchling. The Mersat Lazarus appeared and helped the commander defeat them. When they emerged victorious, Kaith asked what the dragon should be called, and without pause, the commander mysteriously informed her that the dragon was female, and that her name was Aurene. Congratulations, commanders. This is the part of the story where we all became dragon parents. The Exalted Luminate had the commander help impart crucial lessons of kindness, generosity, and combat to the young dragon. Taimi had the brain flash that if mortals struggled to destroy the dragons, then perhaps draconic power itself should be used to fell them. The commander decided to head into the Shiver Peaks to find Bram and hunt one of Jormag's Icebrood to enable Taimi to study its magical draconic corruption. Bram, meanwhile, was in the far Shiver Peaks, where he was seeking out a mystic scroll. Upon the commander's arrival, he took out his frustration and grief on them, but with their assistance, he managed to secure it and enchant his bow with magic. A quick little lore note. The Fang of the Serpent is an important relic to the Norn that's located in the Great Lodge of Holbrick. This tooth once belonged to Jormag and was knocked out by the great hero Asgir Dragonrender. The Norn believe that unless a new hero can damage the Fang, their people will have no hope of defeating Jormag. In 100 years, no Norn has managed to do so. Except returning to Holbrick, Bram fired an arrow at Jormag's tooth, cracking it to the roars and cheers of the onlookers. It was the sign that the time to strike back at the dragons had arrived. With perfect timing as usual, Taimi called to confirm that with the information they'd gathered, she'd created a dragon-slaying machine. But dragons were not the only threat our heroes would face. Due to the aforementioned Goatee Man shenanigans, doubt was cast upon the entity Lazarus. Marjorie, who had been shadowing Lazarus due to her own suspicions, alerted the group that he was raising an army in the Fire Islands. Taimi set up a trap to expose the Mersat's secrets. Lazarus arrived at the lab, intending to seize the dragon-killing machine for himself, but was caught in the trap. His illusion faded to reveal that he was, in fact, and hold on to ya butts, Balthazar, the human god of fire and war. He took the device and boogied on out. The group chased him to Draconis Mons, there's a lot of words, everybody, where they confronted Balthazar over the slumbering body of Primordus. Balthazar absorbed the dragon's energy, sending both it and its twin Jormag back into their deep sleep. He then disappeared. With both dragons having returned to a dormant state, Tyria would enjoy a momentary peace. However, Balthazar's fate remained unknown, along with his plans to make use of the draconic energies he had absorbed. Which takes us to Path of Fire. The god of war sought to claim the power of Kralkatorrik for himself. He pushed forward into the Crystal Desert and left a fiery trail of destruction in his wake. Let's return to the 6 human gods real quick. While the gods historically played an active role in leading humanity to flourish, roughly 200 years ago they decided that they would leave Tyria behind for good, which was totally cool, and the humans were fine with it and definitely didn't have a crisis of faith ever since. Conquered by an undead lich named Palawa Ignatius Joko. Yes, everyone, I know, I don't even have to look at the chat, and I'm sure I know what's going to be happening. Alona had long been a human nation cut off from their central Tyrian brethren. For the first time in generations, representatives from mainland Tyria would cross into Alona and pursue Balthazar to re-establish contact with the isolated region. The commander sought to aid the population, and in doing so learned that a dragon had been active in the area, named Vlast. Vlast was revealed to be the first scion of Glint and brother to Aurene. The commander tracked Balthazar and Vlast until they were finally able to confront the god, who had captured and restrained the dragon. During the clash, Balthazar referred to Ritlock as a friend, saying that he alone would be spared. Balthazar moved to strike down the commander, but Vlast managed to break free and sacrificed himself to block the blow. Vlast's body turned to crystal and exploded. The members of Dragon's Watch awoke to find Balthazar had vanished, but the question of why he'd called Ritlock friendo remained. So it turns out, Ritlock had met a super sketchy old man chained up in the mists while he was searching for his one true love, Sahothin, and let the guy reignite the sword, then freed him without a second thought. He now knew that the old man had been Balthazar, and Sahothin, the god's own blade. He promised the commander he would make up for his actions. The commander found echoes of Vlast's memories in the gleaming fragments of his shattered body. Vlast's recollections spoke about a hidden weapon, his struggles to follow his mother's legacy, his fears if Balthazar managed to kill Kralkatorrik, and his hopes that his sister would find her path a better one than his. With no other leads to this hidden weapon, the group sought long-lost secrets from long-lost souls. They traveled into the mists where they found the Sanctum of the Gods. Cormyr was the only remaining deity to be found, though she too would soon depart their world. She told them that the gods had left Tyria to avoid a cataclysmic battle with the Elder Dragons. Balthazar insisted avoiding battle was cowardice, and threatened the other gods. The rest of the 6 stripped Balthazar of his power and chained him in the mists, for which he swore he would get vengeance. Once free of the mists, the commander also went on to unearth more about the true purpose of Glint's legacy, to preserve Tyria's magical balance by replacing elder dragons. They also discovered why Balthazar had hunted Vlast. Kralkatorrik's own blood was its weakness, the same blood that flowed through his descendants, Glint, Vlast, and Aurene. Intending to share this information, the commander moved to reconvene with their allies when Balthazar ambushed them. After a brief battle, the commander was overpowered, their life hanging in the balance. Just when all hope seemed lost, Aurene barreled down from the skies to try and defend them. But while her spirit fought valiantly, Balthazar was able to overpower her with his sheer strength. The last thing the commander saw was Aurene in chains, before Balthazar struck them a lethal blow. And then you died. And that was the end of Guild Wars 2. Oh, wait. Oh, then the commander awoke, without their memories, and in the domain of the lost. They were able to reclaim their mind and encountered Palawa Joko in the process. Joko had made a deal with Balthazar, but instead of fulfilling his end of the bargain, Balthazar just chose to imprison the Lich King in the domain of the lost. That seems fine. The commander didn't choose to free the conqueror, but they did choose to free themselves by completing tasks for Grenth's servant who returned them to the world of the living. Awakening, the commander's still body reanimated with new life. Alongside Dragon's Watch and the war marshals in the region, the commander assembled an army prepared to face down Balthazar's Forged. Wave after wave of Balthazar's forces crashed into the defenders. Still, the commander held strong. Balthazar bound Aurene to one of his war beasts, using her to lure Kralkatorrik, and launched an attack when he arrived. Leaping to her aid, as Aurene had tried to do for them, the commander killed the war beast and freed the young dragon. Together, Aurene and the commander killed Balthazar, ensuring his flame would never raise another land. The death of the god caused a massive surge of energy, which was absorbed by Kralkatorrik and his granddaughter Aurene. Aurene then flew off, with Kralkatorrik following, sparing the surviving forces from his wrath. Which takes us to Living Season 4. A brandstorm erupted over the city of Amnoon. Following its devastation, Aurene, now an adolescent dragon, landed before the commander. She gave the assembled allies a vision of Faranur, located in Istan and currently filled with a huge army of awakened. Faranur had once belonged to the primeval kings before a horrific illness known as the Scarab Plague had ravaged it. The disease caused victims to develop scarabs under their skin, which is the worst. Palawa Ignatius Joko was good at one thing, and one thing in particular: not staying dead. Having managed to escape from the underworld, he'd put a bounty on the commander's head and decided to kidnap Taimi to exact his revenge. Arriving in Faranur, Dragon's Watch continued through the city until they reached an Asuran Inquest gate hub. Pushing through the forces at the portal, they found and freed Taimi. Before the Awakened fell back, they informed the commander that Palawa Joko had declared war on them and their allies. Taimi led the commander to rescue and recruit a former friend of hers from the College of Synergetics who had joined the Inquest, Blish, and his brother, Goric. Meanwhile, Joko and his undead forces broke into the labs the brothers worked in and stole all the research the Inquest had done on none other than the Scarab Plague itself. Joko began to strategically unleash the plague. In response, the commander rallied forces to besiege Joko's moon fortress. In the end, the commander faced Joko alone. After a long battle full of insults, taunts, and jeers, Joko finally left, leaving only silence behind him. But you remember what I said Joko's number one skill was? Yeah, so Joko rose again and trapped both the commander and Bram. He proceeded to monologue, but at the climax of his speech, Aurene surprised Joko and then ate him. After being devoured, not even Joko had a final sassy retort. While Joko's threat subsided, Kralkatorrik's rose. His fearsome champions, massive crystalline dragons known as Shatterers, began to tear rifts between the physical world and the mists. The newly freed factions of Alona and the commander's forces sought out a long-abandoned Sunspear sanctuary called Sun's Refuge. They'd only just secured the space when a rift spilled branded monsters and the spirits of the undead on their doorstep. Air, Bram's mother, and Snaff, the former member of Destiny's Edge who had died to Kralkatorrik, joined the fray and fought off the branded. When the dust had settled, they imparted a message from Glint's spirit to Aurene. It was time for her to kill Kralkatorrik and take his place as an elder dragon. However, Aurene received multiple prophetic visions of the possible outcome of this conflict. No matter the ally, no matter the location, all ended the same way, with her own death. Aurene fled, worrying the allied forces. Still, they could only continue their plan to lure Kralkatorrik into the mist in the hope of planting a tracker on him. When Kralkatorrik arrived, Blish sacrificed his golem body to power the tracker due to an unfortunate turn of events, and the commander was forced to leave him behind. In the mournful aftermath, Kaith arrived and took both Aurene and the commander once more into Glint's lair. There she would bequeath these words.
With you, champion, I share my true legacy and Kralkatorrik's greatest secret. He foresaw the possibility of a world at peace, a world without strife between dragons and mortals, a world without him.
At the keep, nearly every allied force gathered to prepare for the assault on Kralkatorrik, from Alonian allies to the members of the Pact. Aurene returned to confront the fears she had once run from. As her mother had faced her own death, so too would she. Kaith offered herself to Aurene to be willingly branded, and the commander assumed a new title, that of Dragon Champion. Aurene spoke her first words to the gathered forces, but they would also be some of her last. Aurene's visions of the battle turned out to be accurate, and while fighting beside the commander, she was killed by Kralkatorrik. But you remember that thing about Joko? Yeah, well, you are what you eat. Gathered to mourn the loss of their only hope, the commander, Cantha, and their closest companions pulled the dragon's impaled body free from Kralkatorix's killing spike. Without the jagged crystal, her body repaired itself, and Aurene rose from the dead, just as her champion had. The commander mounted Aurene and chased after Kralkatorix. Aurene managed to blast off one of his wings and opened a portal back to Tyria, which Kralkatorix raced through. He crashed into the ocean southeast of Or, creating new islands with his body and pieces of the mists. Aurene flew the commander into Kralkatorix's mouth, straight to his heart. Inside, Kralkatorix was warring with a manifestation of his own torment. There they clashed at last, and Kralkatorix's vision of a world without him came to pass. With Kralkatorix defeated, Aurene ascended to become an elder dragon and rose into the heavens. Chasing away the shadows of a war-torn world, the light of a new day had dawned. For time's sake, we are going to do a bit of an abbreviated run through the Icebrood Saga so that I can take you all to Cantha. So, thank you for listening so far, and here we go. The Char had been fighting a war on 3 fronts for much of recent history. 1, against the vengeful human ghosts of Ascalon. Another, against the branded caused by Kralkatorix's corrupted dragon brand. And the last amongst themselves, as they struggled to decide whether or not they could choose to set aside a history of war for a future of peace. In an unusual sign of camaraderie, the Char invited the commander to the Blood Legion homelands for an all-legions rally commemorating the defeat of Kralkatorix. Tribune Crecia Stoneglow welcomed the party to the valley. Blood Legion Imperator Bangar Runebringer spoke, and a ceremonial battle ensued, led by Ryland Steelcatcher, who was revealed to be Ritlock and Crecia's son. Why did you pick Sahothin over her, Ritlock? Aurene brought an end to the battle when it got out of hand, but the sight of Kralkatorix's progeny at a celebration for his defeat drew a mixed reaction from the attending Char. While the celebrations continued, a sense of unease pervaded the events. This unease led Bangar, Ryland, and several sympathetic warbands of Char to head into the Shiver Peaks with Bram's stolen bow. They were planning to subjugate Jormag, so the Char too could possess a weapon as powerful as Aurene. In the next bit, unfortunately, while they searched and sought and received a summons from General Almora, at the keep they were summoned to, they found all of the occupants dead. Unnatural whispers plagued Dragon's Watch while they searched, worming their way into the party's thoughts. By the time they found General Almora, she was long dead, buried under a slew of rubble. Alas, it would later be discovered that Almora had freed herself and attempted to stop Bangar. At his command, she had died by Ryland's hand. While Bangar continued to his march to uncover Jormag, the commander discovered the source of the whispers was one of Jormag's champions named Drakkar. While they sought the beast, Bram found a shrine dedicated to the spirit wolf, who tasked him with purifying the fallen shrines of Ox, Eagle, and Wolverine to gain their allegiance. He would go on to do this, and the party would confront and then defeat Drakkar. To the far north of Drizzlewood, it was discovered that Jormag was within the Frost Citadel, an ancient keep long corrupted by the dragon's ice. While a new unified force known as the United Legions gathered together in the Char to bring together the remnants of their people, pushing back Ryland, who offered peace but was rebuked by some of the actions of the other members. The commander and their companions realized that a final assault to the Frost Citadel would be necessary. Deep within the fortress, they encountered Bangar and battled him, but he was saved by Jormag, who awoke and made him their glorified mouthpiece, choosing Ryland instead to become their champion, before leaving Bangar behind. Primordus and Jormag were a package deal. Twin forces that opposed one another and revealed their weaknesses in turn. When Jormag began to stir, Primordus did as well. Each fought to claim more magic than the other to overpower them. This threat, after the Char and the peoples of the world had been united, became the new main priority, although Ryland and his forces still rallied behind Jormag. A plan was devised. Elder dragons fed from ley lines, so they would look for a nexus and use it as a lure. Then, with Aurene's crystalline refraction, the dragon's magic could be redirected from their champions and used against one another. If they were starving, injured, and cut off from their magic supply, they'd be forced to clash. But only Jormag had a champion. Well, it was lucky then that, recalling Owl's final words, Bram had offered himself as Primordus's new champion. It would take all of his will and the power of the spirits of the wild to retain even a shred of himself to complete the mission. The dragons collided in a huge spectacle of light and magic, neutralizing one another and leveling anything in range. When the light faded, their energy was all that remained, coursing up and away towards some unknown point. Ryland was unable to relinquish his fury of the champion's power he'd claimed, and Ritlock was forced to kill his own son. Bram, however, let it go for the first time in his life, and survived. We go now to the south. across the unending sea into the setting of our newest expansion in Guild Wars 2, Cantha. Cantha is a testament to human resilience. The lands and people that compose it have a history of both turmoil and triumph that's reflected in its ancient landmarks, enduring artistry, and modern life. Cantha's landscape varies from densely populated cities to calm seaside villages. The island's northern coastline is also the earliest known location of human settlements on Tyria. When last we saw Cantha and Guild Wars 1 factions, it was characterized by 4 distinct regions, starting with Xingjie Island. Xingjie Island is located off the western coast of Cantha. Covered in rolling hills and farmland, it's historically home to Seitong Harbor and the Xingjie Monastery. Xingjie, or Shining Jewel in the Old Canthan language, was a monastery that provided training to students of all heroic professions and martial forms. Next up is Kaineng City, the capital of Cantha. Kaineng's sprawling maze was so large that it constituted almost a third of the entire continent. The upper tiers of the city were opulent and housed the Emperor's historic Raisu Palace, while the lower, impoverished portions were a populated maze of ramshackle houses and alleys. At the time of Guild Wars 1, many gangs operated in the city, including the Jade Brotherhood and the Ampha. Further inland lies the Echovald Forest. Once verdant and full of life, the Echovald Forest was largely turned into a natural cathedral of stone after the magical calamity known as the Jade Wind. Echovald was where the Kurzik people had long put down roots and flourished culturally. Those who survived the wind's petrification continued breathing new life into the forest, filling it with Gothic architecture, music, and art. Within the forest's depths lies an area called Arborstone, which shelters the Cathedral Zuhelze. Players will be able to revitalize this site in the upcoming Mastery track in End of Dragons. Echovald Forest wasn't the only region to be affected by the Jade Wind. To the east is an inland body of water, originally named for its vibrant color, the Jade Sea. The sea has long been home to the Luxons, a nomadic tribe of humans that sailed across the waters when they still rippled with waves. At the time of factions, these waves had been transformed into solid jade due to the effects of the Jade Wind. With no waters to fish, mining the resource became one of the only viable industries in the region. Peaceful Naga also lived here, but were nearly driven to extinction when the Jade Wind transformed many of their brethren. The surviving Naga cast away their former peace with humans, seeing them as the perpetrators of the tragedy. It's been at least 262 years since Guild Wars 1 factions. In that time, yeah, it's possible that a few things have changed, but to understand just how much, let's look at the start of Canthan history and the founding of the Empire of the Dragon. The ancient people of Cantha were made up of many feuding tribes, including the ancestors of the Luxons and the Kurziks. These tribes were eventually united under a single leader, the warlord Kaing. Kaing established the empire and renamed himself Kaineng Ta, or Lord Emperor, because nobody wants to just follow some random guy named Kaing. 46 years later, Kaineng Ta died under suspicious circumstances and passed the throne super conveniently to his son Yanzhou, who definitely didn't murder him. During Yanzhou's reign, the Luxon and Kurzik tribes tried to boogie on out from the empire for the first of many times, only to be forced back into the fold and made into vassal states. Nobody was happy with this outcome except for the emperor, but rather than take it out on him, the Luxons and Kurziks decided to just take it out on each other for roughly 1,000 years. That's the basic gist of the founding of the Empire of the Dragon. But what events in Cantha's history would bridge the gap between then and Guild Wars 1 factions? The Canthan calendar organizes time periods into ages, beginning from the date the clans unified under Kaineng Ta. This ensuing age was called the Age of the Marmoset. The Age of the Marmoset was followed by the Age of the Falcon. After Falcon came the Age of the Bat, and the rule of the 11th Emperor of Cantha, Emperor Chanang. Chanang decided his ancestor's title Kaineng Ta didn't do it for him, and took the title Kaineng We no Su instead, meaning Emperor Closer to the Stars. All princes after him were expected to train and achieve ascension in order to be worthy of his legacy. The Age of the Bat gave way to the Age of the Hedgehog, then Tortoise, and finally to our current age, the Age of the Dragon. Is it coincidence that our current age is the Age of the Dragon? No, I don't think so. The reign of the 26th Emperor of Cantha, Emperor Angxian, would begin uneventfully enough. In the time of factions, Angxian's rule was supported by many ministries, the greatest of which was the Celestial Ministry. The Celestial Ministry was made of 4 divisions. The Ministry of Fire, led by Minister Zal. It oversaw law enforcement and justice. Minister Zal symbolically had control over the sunrise and sunset. The Ministry of Earth, led by Minister Jaisan, in charge of record-keeping, infrastructure, and accounting. Minister Jaisan's domain were the bounties of the land, namely animals, vegetation, and minerals. The Ministry of Water, led by Minister Nai. It encompassed the water supply, irrigation, and fishing industry. Nai controlled the rainfall as well as the moon's rise and set. Lastly, the Ministry of Air, led by Minister Tao, responsible for overseeing trade and shipping by air. Minister Tao controlled the weathers, winds, and storms. The people of Cantha weren't really happy about the taxation the ministry subjected them to, but they generally loved Emperor Angxian, so it was good he had a long, long life. Enter one Shiro Tagachi, assassin, distant descendant of Kainang Ta, committer of one of Tyria's top 10 anime betrayals. But he didn't start out as a bad guy. When he was young, Shiro's skills brought him to the attention of Emperor Angxian. He was invited to join the Imperial Guard and eventually became the Emperor's favored bodyguard. Shiro accomplished a ton during his years of service, including helping Angxian negotiate a peace treaty between the Luxans and Kurziks. Remember that whole 1,000-year-long feud thing? During the talks, Shiro even convinced both of their champions to set aside their differences and work together to benefit Cantha. Seems good, right? Yeah, it would have been if it hadn't been for Abaddon. Abaddon was once one of the 6 human gods and the fallen predecessor of the goddess Cormyr. He was known as the god of knowledge and water. After attempting to overthrow the other gods and being imprisoned in the mists for his treachery, Abaddon began coming up with plans for revenge, like you do. One such plan involved sending a demon disguised as a fortune teller to all-around good guy Shiro Tagachi. Hey, Shiro! You know that emperor you serve that you swore to protect forever? Well, he's going to super murder you at the Harvest Temple. You should murder him first. Everybody will think you're awesome for it.
And Shiro went, "Oh my god, it's a random fortune teller. You are totally right."
Driven mad by forbidden magic and his own paranoia, he waited until Angxian was bent in prayer at the annual harvest ceremony, then assassinated him. Shiro killed most of the soldiers that rushed to aid their fallen emperor, until only the Luxan champion Archamoris and the Kurzik champion Victor remained. Fun fact, Revenants will soon be getting to know these two personally with their new End of Dragons Elite specialization, Vindicator. Before Shiro could use his dark powers to slay the two champions, the assassin Vizu plunged her daggers into his back, causing him to drop his swords. This created an opportunity for Archamoris and Victor to take up his enchanted weapons and pretty much cleave him in twain with them. That's in half. Shiro's death cry unleashed a horrific wave of dark magic across the land. The Jade Wind turned the surrounding sea into its literal namesake and petrified all life within the Echovold forest. The 3 heroes that had stood against him lie dead, frozen in jade upon the temple's floor. Interestingly enough, the protectors of the Echovold forest, the Wardens, were mysteriously spared the wind's effects. Lost to a kind of madness, they held all humans responsible and sought vengeance. But while the lands grieved and raged, Shiro's spirit just kicked back in the mists, biding his time until he could rise again. However, this did give Cantha a brief reprieve as they struggled to rebuild in the Jade Wind's aftermath. These efforts were led by Angxian's son Hanjai, who took the vacant throne only to discover the empire he'd inherited was on the verge of collapse. Tales claim Hanjai prayed to the ancients for guidance. His prayers were answered by a mighty celestial dragon that swooped down from the heavens, assuring him Cantha would rise once more. Hanjai devoted himself to achieving that goal. He offered refugees safe harbor in Kainang City and made the land as secure as he could. The next summer, Hanjai instituted the Dragon Festival. It was meant to celebrate the founding of a new community on Xingje Island and the survival of the empire in the face of calamity. With the howling of the Jade Winds quieting at last, other conflicts began to brew. The greatest of these would be the Tengu Wars. The Tengu have long lived alongside humans, and are a race of humanoid avians belonging to many different tribes. These include the Angchu, Avakara, Karomi, Quetzal, and Sansali. These tribes each have their own history of political standings and relations with other races, yet despite their differences, most Tengu are known for their strong sense of honor, family, and history. But in the wake of the Jade Wind's tragedy, the Sansali Tengu massacred a human village in Xingje, leading to the large-scale villainization of Tengu as a whole. This would start a great war between the Sansali and Angchu tribes, who had a much better relationship with their human counterparts. 2 successive emperors would live to see the Tengu Wars rage on. Cantha, the 27th emperor, who vastly improved trade between Cantha and Tyria, and Cantha's successor, Emperor Kisu. Kisu grew up admiring his elder half-brother Togo. Both were Emperor Kinta's sons, but Kisu was the legitimate heir, while Togo was born to the emperor's concubine. During his reign, Emperor Kisu arranged peace talks between the Sinsali and Angshu Tengu. Master Togo oversaw the summit, but was nearly assassinated during the event. Investigations revealed a trap laid by humans to pin the blame on the Tengu and justify their genocide. Thankfully, Master Togo and an Angshu representative named Talon Silverwing were able to reveal the true culprits and bring them to justice. The peace that followed marked the end of the Tengu Wars. Whew, finally! We've made it to Guild Wars 1 Factions! Years later, the hero of Tyria, Guild Wars 1's protagonist, was called to Xingje Monastery by Master Togo, now its leader. The hero was tasked with identifying growing threats in Cantha. Unfortunately, they would find much more than they bargained for. Togo and the hero discovered a potent affliction wreaking havoc throughout the land that turned innocent life into vile, diseased creatures known as the Afflicted, and they were gross. They were really gross. The frantic search for the source of the disease revealed that the affliction was caused by none other than Shiro the Betrayer, using powers he'd gained in the afterlife. You see, during his years in the Mists, Shiro had become an envoy. An envoy is a shepherd to the souls of the dead, and appears before mortals that have recently passed to guide their souls into the mists. All envoys were once criminals in life, forced by the Oracle of Mists to serve penance. Shiro didn't particularly feel like serving penance, and had begun using his envoy powers for evil. Realizing the grave threat that he posed, Master Togo sent a request for help to his former student brother Menlo, before heading to Kaineng City. There, he hoped to warn his half-brother Emperor Kisu about the impending danger, but found that the plague had already started to spread throughout Kaineng City. If Cantha was to have any hope at all, it would lie in uniting its people against a common cause, which would be easier said than done. Following the Jade Wind, scarce resources in the ancestral lands of both the Luxon Armada and the Kurzuk Great Houses had amped up their generations-long feud into intermittent warfare and skirmishes. The Luxon Armada still resided on the Jade Sea, but were forced to redesign their seafaring vessels following the water's alteration. They turned them into mobile fortresses called Leviathans, and outfitted them with weapons. The Kurzuk Great Houses had grown to be fiercely religious. Led by the Council of Nobles, they were culturally and artistically driven, with each of the 5 great houses being devoted to one of the human gods. The Kurzuks fought using juggernauts, once human warriors bound to forever trees. Each juggernaut was tied to one tree and granted immortality so long as that tree lived. The hero of Tyria managed to prove themselves to their chosen faction after a bit of a rep grind. Then, with the aid of their allies, they convinced the groups to set aside their differences and work together to eliminate Shiro's threat. Alliances secured, Master Togo journeyed with the hero to the site of Angxian's assassination, the Harvest Temple. He hoped to shed light on Shiro's plans by obtaining the aid of an ancient and wise salt-spray dragon said to still reside there, Kunavang. Salt-spray dragons such as Kunavang had been corrupted by the Jade Wind and forced to obey Shiro's will. Long had Kunavang been trapped in the temple, driven out of her senses by Shiro's influence. The heroes confronted the dragon and fought off waves of the afflicted that were summoned to her side. After her defeat, Kunavang returned to her senses and immediately offered to lend her celestial magics to the cause. Shiro's fellow envoys appeared at the temple and told the group that Shiro had been searching for the ingredients to a spell that would return him to the mortal realm. He was only missing one: the spilled blood of the imperial family. The hero and Master Togo raced to Raisu Palace. Shiro's army of Shirokin had already overrun the palace's outer defenses. These animated constructs contained stones that housed spirits Shiro had taken from the mists and forced into his servitude. Kunavang's celestial skills helped the hero and their allies defeat the Shiroken and fight their way to the inner sanctum. They arrived just as Shiro was preparing to strike down Emperor Kisu. Master Togo rushed to his brother's side, taking the fatal blow himself. Shiro feared his plans had been dashed, but realized that Togo's blood would fulfill the requirement just as well. Made whole once more, Shiro was deadlier than ever. Yet with renewed life came mortality. The hero and Brother Menlo stood before him, resolved to avenge Togo and end the blight Shiro had inflicted upon Cantha. The battle was not easily won. Shiro summoned spirits from the mists to assault the hero and Brother Menlo, but Kunavang's celestial powers allowed them to call forth Archimoris and Saint Victor in retaliation. At last, good triumphed, and the hero struck the final blow. As Shiro lay dying, the Oracle of the Mists appeared, sealing his body in jade and imprisoning his soul forevermore in the underworld. Cantha grieved the loss of Master Togo, and all those the affliction and the Jade Wind had taken from them. At long last, though, the Empire could begin to rebuild. Which brings us to Guild Wars 1 Winds of Change. After Guild Wars' main campaigns, ArenaNet created a series of mini-campaigns under the umbrella Guild Wars Beyond. Winds of Change was the chapter continuing the faction storyline, and told the story of a new ministry that was becoming increasingly prominent in Cantha. The Ministry of Purity. Even with Shiro dead for realsies this time, the affliction left a multitude of garish horrors roaming Cantha. The Ministry of Purity tasked themselves with cleansing the remaining afflicted, all while advocating security over freedom, and Canthans over foreigners. The ministry was first led by Minister Reiko Murakami, who had formerly been a member of the Ministry of Flame. Minister Reiko was eventually assassinated by her niece Miku Yudachi and the hero of Tyria, who believed the ministry had become a threat to those that did not fit their ideal of a purified Cantha. Miku hoped killing Reiko would free her brother Ashu from the ministry. However, Ashu decided to take control of the Ministry of Purity himself. He pledged to show the people of Cantha the correct path to walk without repeating Reiko's mistakes. Yeah, okay, Ashu, you do that. Emperor Kisu would rule until his passing in 1127 AE, and in the wake of his death, Emperor Usoku took a firm hold of the empire. Usoku aggressively shored up Cantha's military. The Luxans and Kurziks had renounced being vassals of the empire, but Usoku used his military might to force them to bend the knee once more. Usoku then began a campaign to rid Cantha of non-humans, which was supported by none other than the Ministry of Purity. Yeah, way to go, Ashu. You really turned that ministry around, huh? Those Canthans who did not agree with the Emperor's dictates were given no choice but to leave their homeland, seeking refuge and sanctuary in Alona and Tyria. Usoku became the last Canthan Emperor to be known by name in mainland Tyria. In 1219 AE, the Elder Dragon Zaitan brought the sunken city of Or back to the surface, sending a tsunami crashing against Cantha's shores and cutting the continent off completely from the mainland. Facing persecution in their homeland of Cantha, a group of Tengu dared to risk pushing through the risen forces to make a break for the continent of Tyria. They were led by a descendant of Talon Silverwing, and went on to found the Dominion of Winds. Let's go ahead and talk a little more about some recent history. The current state of affairs in Cantha are a mystery to all but those living on the isolated island. However, several notable groups and figures we've encountered in the story of Guild Wars 2 have connections to Cantha. Marjorie Delacqua was born to a working-class family of Canthan descent in Divinity's Reach. Her parents inherited Canthan items from her grandparents. What Casimir and Marjorie discover in the lands of Jory's ancestors will be something you'll have to discover for yourselves in End of Dragons. Next up, the Aether Blades, a multiracial group of sky pirates featured in Living Season 1. They commandeered several packed airships and waged war from the skies for Scarlet Briar. Captain Mai Trin was their leader, responsible for assassinating Captain Theo Ashford during Scarlet's War to weaken Lion's Arch. Mai was captured after a Lion Guard raid, but the Aether Blades eventually freed her from captivity and fled into the edge of the mists. Like Marjorie Delacqua, Mai Trin is of Canthan descent. Mai Trin's current first mate is an Asura named Anka. Pre-Aether Blades, Anka worked with Gorik at the Thamanova power reactor. Situated on a ley line confluence, the researchers at the facility were particularly interested in draconic energy. What exactly the Aether Blades have been up to while lurking in the mists is unknown, but something has prompted them to make their move. And, crash one of their airships into some innocent guy's fishing spot. Lastly, we have the Zephyrites, a nomadic group that's mainly composed of Canthan and Elonian humans. In recent years, they've been an active part of the Festival of Four Winds. Zephyrites inherited the legacy of the only dragon in history to have allied herself with the mortal races before Aurene, her mother, Glint. The Zephyrites traveled to Cantha and traded with the locals there as recently as 7 years ago. They claim that Cantha has become one of their most culturally colorful ports of call. So now that we've covered Cantha's past entirely, what about Cantha's future? Usoku may be the last descendant of Kaineng Ta to be spoken of in Tyria, but not for long. An empress now sits upon the throne, bearing the weight of responsibility for all life within the empire. The empress's reign is supported by her half-sister June. She works to turn misfortune into fortune by building a future for Cantha on the back of dragon-infused Jade. Even before the development of Jade tech, the magic of dragons has played a pivotal role in shaping Cantha. According to human legend, dragons of all shapes, sizes, and origin have called the continent home for thousands of years. From Kunavang the Salt Spray Dragon to Tamu the Celestial Dragoness, dragonkind has become the stuff of both reality and myth to the people of Cantha. And while Cantha is rich with legends, none are greater than those we ourselves have inspired. Some of you may have started out as the hero of Tyria, Maybe you've only ever been the commander, but whenever your journey began, we are all about to set foot on Canthan soil for the first time in 15 years. This is the future of Guild Wars. The future of the Elder Dragons. Your future ready to unfold. Are you ready, champions, to face the end of dragons? Thank you all so much for listening. Again, I'm Rookery, aka Rook, an ArenaNet partner. You can find me on Twitch and YouTube at ROOKURI, or on Twitter at Rookery_. Let's see what the future of Guild Wars 2 holds, and I hope you enjoy every single second of your adventures in End of Dragons. I'll see you all in Cantha.